stock that was either non-productive or sick, or I had stinks die. It was really, it took me several years before I had my first successful loss from breeder tubs, down one of the aisles. We just went to this method this year with the blue tape, which works really well. If you guys haven't been doing it, it's the best thing ever. So the blue painter's tape, we just write on what's in there and feeding and all that stuff. There's another aisle with our old Habitat Systems racks that we started with. And there's a rack aisle with both. Some other new racks. We have a large walk-in incubator now that we built that holds about 1,000 clutches. And then we have, this is our overflow incubator. So like, this one will hold about 60. So occasionally, not this year, but last year we had to flow over into that, and then we're hatching animals to help clean the incubator out. But that's about our limitation. It's about 1,100, 1,200 clutches at a time is about what we can incubate. So I think one of the other areas that it's going to be part of the next talk that I have a lot more expertise in is the global markets. We basically started Hong Kong. We just a group of guys going over there, going from pet store to pet store and explaining what we do, and it just caught fire, and Hong Kong has been a huge market for us. Now we're expanding into Dubai and India, and so I think that also is going to help take some pressure off the U.S. market, because a lot of people don't realize the European market has been taking so many of our animals. It's really helped take the pressure off the U.S. market. So. But that's going to be the next talk. So Chad's going to discuss the challenges of moving between the tiers. I bet he knows all of them, don't you?
Yes, I got tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 down. I appreciate that. So there's the economic challenge when you're moving from a tier 3 home operation to moving into a tier 2 business operation. Some more mic photos there. All right. So you'll be adding rents, utilities, employees, payroll taxes, and your food bill is going to be exponentially more expensive. So it's far more complicated to move from tier 3 to tier 2 than just saying, I'm going to add 10 racks and put some more animals in there. It's way more difficult than that. There's also a kind of a dead zone in that transition as well. Tier 3 breeder working from home with very little overhead, producing about 100 snakes a year, can make a pretty good living for himself, provided that he's producing the right animals and the high dollar animals. But once you start adding the expense of a facility, utilities, payroll taxes, then it becomes much more difficult to make that same living when you're keeping things small and simple. And once you start producing more animals, now you've also got to find a way to sell more animals. So the cost of marketing, the cost of branding your business and yourself is also an added expense as you make that jump from tier 3 to tier 2. For example, at Pro Exotics, with our normal staff of about 6 animal caretakers, we were paying about $8,000 a month in rents for about 10,000 square feet. During the Colorado winters, our utility bill was somewhere around $3,000 a month. And the staff of about 6, that payroll bill was about $20,000 a month. So let's do some quick math. We got $20,000 employees, $8,000 in rents, $3,000 in utilities. So we're at $31,000. We haven't even bought a mouse or a single cricket yet. So it's a lot of corn snakes, it's a lot of leopard geckos just to pay the utility bill, much less the rent and the employees. So a strong tier 3 breeder who's very productive, who's very efficient, with very little overhead, has got great strategies as far as marketing and branding, and really wisely chosen and managed collection. He can do really well for himself at the end of the year, as opposed to a tier 2 guy who's struggling each month to make that $30,000 a month nut every month, month after month, months after month. So the bottom line to this whole thing is, as you move up from tier 3 to tier 2, or if you're a tier 2 guy and you want to go to tier 1, is Bigger's not for everyone. Bigger's not always better. And remember, this is a hobby. It's supposed to be fun. You want to make money at it, but at the same time, making those jumps complicates things quite a bit. Not saying you shouldn't do it. Some people are far more savvy business people than Rob and I were, and that's why they're tier 1 guys. Once you get into the tier 1 category, as you can see here on the slides, that's when you start getting into really imposing numbers, huge overhead, and huge expenses. We're talking a 50,000 square foot facility. That's just mind-blowing. 80 plus employees. Rob and I had a really difficult time just going to handle our staff at 6. I can't even imagine dealing with 80 employees. And then when you have 80 employees, you're also going to have weekly turnover. So there's always somebody new washing dishes, always somebody new cleaning cages. That can get really difficult. An overhead of $200,000 a month. And that's, again, mind-blowing numbers. We were at Bill Bred's place, the Gourmet Rodent, and we were in the leopard gecko room. They were hatching leopard geckos. They were pulling the babies that had just hatched out. They do 350 to 400 baby leopard geckos a day, every day, day after day after day. So huge numbers, but also huge production. Well, those leopard geckos at 350 a day add up to about 125,000 baby leopard geckos a year. Those geckos got to eat. So now you're either buying or trying to produce 2 million mealworms a week, plus another 500,000 crickets a week.
So we did a visit to Bill Brandt's facility down in Florida back in, I think it was June. Again, Bill Brandt is a tier 1 guy. He's the Gourmet Rodent is the rodent side of the business, and then the animal company does the reptile side. So brought a couple of pics along. So this picture is in the ball python room. And you can see these are the Vision CB70 racks. Those are 13 tall, and it's about 1 billion long. This is 1 row in 1 room. In this 1 room, this row repeats again and again and again, and there's multiple rooms. You see it's Chad, and then that's Bill Brandt there, and myself taking a look at some of the just the adult ball pythons. There's another room where they there's actually a series of rooms where they do the baby ball pythons, and Bill Brandt sets up the babies in a little bit different way. So here we're using shoe boxes with lids on them. So instead of being in a rack where the rack itself is the lid, they actually do the babies in shoe boxes, and they do lids, and they stack them up here on these restaurant racks. Now, going back to how do you have 80 employees taking care of dozen species and be able to maintain care and health standards? The way they approach it is these are standard operating procedure care sheets. So these are kind of guide sheets, and each one of these, like this particular set, is the ball python set. So this is what they have in the ball python room, because most of the time the employees they bring in to staff their facility are not reptile hobbyists. They're just people looking for jobs. I mean, you'd have to fill 80 spots. You don't get 80 reptile guys that all know what they're doing. You just get folks that want a job. So you have to coach them up and teach them and get them trained up on how to properly care for the species they're working with. In the ball python set of care sheets here, we have care sheets or guide sheets that talk about how to properly set up.
There were some statistics that just were really shocking to me when I first heard them. There are over 3,000 large chain stores in the country currently, between Petco, PetSmart, PSP, and others. And they're growing by 100 plus new stores a year. There is a dichotomy of our customer base growing and reptiles seeing the mainstream exposure through advertising and other media. NBC recently ran a PetSmart commercial during America's Got Talent advertising ball pythons. Can you imagine a ball python commercial on TV 10 years ago? I can't imagine it, but we are seeing that they're entering the mainstream, and the morphs are entering the mainstream. So I think it provides real opportunity for the tier 3 and tier 2 guys to supply the tier 1 guys that are supplying these 3,000 chain pet stores. We still have this constant threat of reptile legislation from across the country, so it is important to get involved with organizations like USR to help people understand that we love these animals more than anybody, and we want them to be well taken care of, and we want to educate people. And it's not like it used to be where a reptile was sold and it was, you know, just kind of a disposable animal. We really know how to take care of them now. They live 50 plus years in captivity. And you know, what's interesting to note is when you look at the industry as a whole, the live animal side of the market is only 4% of all of total sales. The other 96% is dry goods. It's all that stuff, all the stuff used to support that animal sale. Yet without that 4% sale, then none of it exists. So they need us, even though we're a small part of their total big picture. That 96% of the industry is well represented by companies like ZooMed, Exoterra, and you can do an entire study and a presentation just on that aspect of the industry, just as you could the import side of the business, or focusing on just turtles if you wanted to. But we're focusing on the captive bred side of the industry in this talk, and then the reptile report's going to have a paper coming out that's going to focus just on this part. This I think is going to be a series that is, I found it extremely interesting to hear some of these statistics myself. I think some people see the future as optimistic. I'm one of those people. Bill, Brand, I think Robin and Chad see the future optimistically. Others are more cynical. I get calls a lot. A lot of people ask me all the time, what about the ball python crash? Is the ball python market crashing? Well, it already crashed once. In 2006, 2007, I was having people drive to my house and give me $14,000 for a Mojave ball python. And then the very next year, they were $1,400. And I thought the world was coming to an end. I said, I'm stopping everything right now. I'm not buying another ball python. I'm going to breed my collection and then just ride this down, because I thought, you know, the demand we've reached a saturation point and the ball python market's crashed. Well, at that very same time, Brock Wagner was out buying bananas and spending $50,000 here and $50,000 there. And I told him, I said, I think you're an idiot, because you're not going to be able to sell those. The investment reptile is over. And then we slowly started seeing it grow back. Brock made millions off that decision. About that time, I started doing shows in Europe, and I started seeing my own business increase. And then at the time, because I had, you know, if you skip a few years of investing in ball pythons, then you can really put yourself behind the 8 ball as far as, you know, staying cutting edge and having the projects that people want to buy. So because I did that, now all of a sudden I have this big market in Europe, and I'm able to sell all these animals, but I didn't have enough animals to sell, and so I had one of my big fears was that Brian Barczyk, the guy that I'm here replacing today, I used to all the time say, I'm worried that he's going to start coming to ham, because if he starts coming, I'm going to die, because I didn't have all the cool stuff that he had. So then I decided, why can't I be like Brian? And I spent about 2 years just in reinvesting, buying every quad, triple gene male I could get my hands on, and built our collection to the point where we were competitive in at least with ball pythons with Brian Barczyk's business. Ironically enough, now that we're talking about a crash again, I have the same choice. Do I stop investing in ball pythons? I just made a deal yesterday. I don't know if you guys heard about Brian hatched a scaleless ball python, and I think that is probably the most important mutation that will come in ball pythons. I mean, the corn snakes are incredibly popular, everybody's going to have every current mutation combined with scale as my mouth is. I don't think the ball python market's going to crash, or I would just hang on to my 210 and write it down, but I already made that mistake once. The bottom line, I think, that I want to get across is these are not magic beans that turn into money when they hatch. You have to do a lot of work branding yourself and marketing yourself and getting out at these reptile shows and doing things to move your animals. They're not going to sell themselves. Just a short story, when I first started, king snake was in its infancy, and there were ads on king snake where it would just be a description of a snake. Can you imagine? We had a reticulated python. It has a really pretty yellow head, and it's $300. You know, that would be the kind of ad you would see. And so I was starting about the same time Jeremy Stone was, and I remember telling him, I said, you know, in the age of the internet, people aren't really buying a snake, they're buying a picture of a snake. So I learned everything I could about photography, and I learned how to write HTML so that I could have my own website and host photos for my ads, and it gave me a big advantage. But that was on the internet, on the shipping part. I still, because I had not built a brand yet, I still remember sitting at shows next to Bob Clark. I was right next to him, and I had what I felt like were better animals than he did, and we were friends, and we would compare what we did at the end of the day, and he would have a $35,000 show, and I'd have a $3,000 show, and I couldn't figure, you know, like, what am I doing wrong? And then there was a Daytona show, when Daytona was the big show, where I sold zero, not one single snake, and Pete Call sold $150,000 that week. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I hear people get frustrated when they come to these shows and they say, oh, I didn't do as well as I'd hoped, or my animals didn't sell. It takes a lot of time and a lot of perseverance, and I think that if you have snakes left over at the beginning of a new hatch season that you intended to sell, then you're either producing too many or you are not marketing well enough. You've got to find your balance there to where, I mean, we currently, you know, on a good year we'll produce 6,000 babies, and we still have like a 3-month dry period where we're short of animals. So we still have room for growth, so we may have went too far in the marketing area and not enough in the production area, but it's difficult to strike that balance. But I think the answer is not to keep dropping the price to get noticed. You know, that seems to be a lot of people's strategy, and it hasn't worked in the past. It causes less faith in the market, and I think, unfortunately, that's people need to realize that. So, I think that's all I have. Now, Chad, you can wrap it up with a Q&A here. Maybe 30 to 40 ball python clutches. But at the time, you know, pinstripes were selling for $25,000. So like a few clutches of those was a lot of money, and that was what enabled me to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on racks and really do my expansion. So. Yeah, and now we're doing 1,000 clutches average. We didn't do that this year. We had a bad year, but that's our average. That's what our goal is.
I started at about 12 clutches first time. I held back basically every female I produced that year. Next year I did about 50 clutches. The following year after that, it just grew every single year because I was selling males, making money selling my males, and I was just holding back females like crazy. And then it started getting to 100, and it got to 200. And next year, we'll probably do anywhere in the area of like, let's say 700 to 800 clutches. So it just grows every year. And I didn't really just make a jump. It was more of just a yearly steady growth as the years went on.
It's interesting because as pro exotics, we thought a big goal, 5 years ago was 200 clutches. And then Ben Rennick comes up, he's like, hey, I got 700 clutches. I didn't know that, it's until somebody does it, you don't know that it's possible. Yes, it was a big goal to have 200 clutches, but now folks like Ben have been so successful, they're raising the bar. It's really, in 10 years, just the last 10 years, the game has changed a lot by folks like Ben having that type of achievement. I couldn't wrap my brain around trying to get 700 clutches. We were always trying to target 200. So it's interesting, the perspective changes as different people like Mike and Ben, they start to excel and do so well at what they're doing that it raises the bar for everybody else. Any other questions? Is there an ethical issue with something like the spider ball python with the head wobble?
Well, sorry. Well, I wouldn't have spent a couple $100,000 if I thought that it wasn't going to work. But there's always the chance. I guess we'll have to wait and see. A lot of the ball python game is speculation. But as far as ethically, white ball python wouldn't survive in the wild either. So I have no ethical issue. I've worked with the scaleless corn snakes. They do perfect in captivity. They shed perfect, they do well, they thrive. There's absolutely nothing wrong with them other than they're really cool because they don't have any scales. So I think that the ball python, there's no reason for us to believe that it should be different than the corn snakes, the rat snakes. We have other species of snakes that don't have scales, and it is genetic. So I guess time will tell, but I believe in it.
Within the dog world, the cat world, we're all familiar with dachshunds with those short little legs, the dogs. And there's the munchkin cats with the short legs. That clearly is a mutation. It has some disc issues in the back. It usually has some back issues. I think within the pet world, we're used to mutations that obviously wouldn't survive in the wild, but for whatever reason provide some novelty or some enjoyment for us as pet keepers. The goldfish with the eyes that bulge out, or the brain kind of thing on top of their head. Not what would survive in the wild, but again, it's part of this pet world that we're all in. Is it ethical? I don't see it as unethical. Is it unusual? Certainly. Is it a novelty? Yeah. But I also find spider ball pythons to be beautiful and a great snake to do combination patterns with. I can make some really beautiful snakes based on that spider ball python. So I personally don't have an issue. I don't think you do. We obviously breed spiders and Robin breed spiders as well. I'm okay with it, I guess, long story short.
What?
We're happy to stay and answer as many questions you like. I know some people have filtered out and you've been here for over an hour. So before we take the next question, I just want to say thanks to everybody for coming out and listening. We really appreciate your attention and your time. And again, we're going to redo the talk in Tinley, and then we're going to do a written version of our study on the evolution of the industry, and it'll be up at the Reptile Report later this year. So thanks everybody for coming out. And another question?
You guys have, did you have a question? Well, I kind of comment on something.
What's your guys' take on the legislations and where is it going from here? Do you think it will reach ball pythons?
So the question is as far as the anti-reptile legislation, in the past year or two there's been legal moves made. For example, that you can no longer transport Burmese pythons across state lines, any state. So, and that's in order to prevent the infestation of Burmese in Florida. So I don't really believe that's a valid issue anyways. We had big giant Burmese hunt, and the results were pretty pitiful. So I think it's a blown up political issue. But will that start expanding into more species, such as the ball python? I don't think it's going to happen. We have to be wary about it, and we have to be have a preventative mindset. I think it's really important that we support USR and PJAC so they continue to fight on the legal and political side for our rights to keep reptiles as pets and as businesses. It would be extremely aggressive for them to pull in ball pythons or corn snakes or species like that, but we certainly can't let our guard down. I'm confident that folks like Phil Goss, who's the head of USR, will be able to do their job effectively and prevent that from happening. But it's definitely a concern because they have achieved it with, 4 or 5 species already. It's mostly the giant snake stuff. But yeah, it's a slippery slope. We don't want that coming down and having bearded dragons be outlawed or become illegal, or ball pythons or corn snakes, or really any other species. I think it's a misguided legislation, but we do have to watch out for it, for sure. Tony?